When you stop speaking, when you stop thinking, when you stop searching, silence begins to speak. And silence never lies. Silence feels frightening only because you have never truly been alone with yourself. You are used to noise, words, thoughts, opinions, explanations. From morning till night, something inside you is always talking. Even when you sit quietly, the mind keeps whispering, judging, remembering, planning. And because of this constant inner noise, silence feels empty, awkward, uncomfortable. But silence is not empty. Silence only feels empty to a mind that has forgotten how to listen. In the beginning, when you sit in silence, many things will rise. Restlessness will rise. Old memories will rise. Suppressed emotions will rise. Fear will rise. Sadness will rise. You may feel bored. You may feel irritated. You may feel like escaping. This is why people say silence is difficult. But silence is not difficult. What is difficult is facing yourself without distraction. For years, you have used noise as an escape, talking as an escape, scrolling as an escape, relationships as an escape, work as an escape. Even spirituality sometimes becomes an escape when it is filled with words and concepts. Silence removes all escapes. It leaves you naked in front of yourself. And the mind does not like nakedness. The mind wants constant occupation because in occupation it can avoid truth. Silence exposes. Silence brings everything to the surface. All the wounds you never healed, all the emotions you never expressed, all the questions you never answered honestly. Silence does not create these things. Silence only reveals them. This is why silence feels heavy in the beginning. But if you do not run, if you do not distract yourself, if you do not label this discomfort as bad, something starts changing slowly. The same silence that felt heavy begins to feel spacious. The same silence that felt threatening begins to feel safe. The same silence that felt empty begins to feel alive, because silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the absence of resistance. When you stop resisting what arises within you, silence becomes friendly. You begin to see that thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, memories appear and disappear, but something in you remains untouched. Something watches, something stays still, something does not move with the noise. That something is your real center. You have lived most of your life at the surface, reacting, responding, adjusting. Silence invites you inward. And the inward journey is the most radical journey a human being can take. Because outward journeys add things to you, but inward journeys remove everything that is false. In silence, you begin to notice how unnecessary your constant thinking is. You realize that many thoughts repeat without purpose. The same worries, the same regrets, the same fears, the same stories. You see that thinking has become mechanical, automatic, not intelligent. Silence brings intelligence back. Not the intelligence of words, but the intelligence of clarity. You start to feel rather than analyze. You start to sense rather than calculate. You start to understand without explanations. This is a very different way of knowing. This knowing is quiet. It does not argue. It does not shout. It does not need proof. This is why all real answers come in silence. When you ask questions loudly, the mind answers. When you ask questions silently, existence answers. But existence does not speak in words. It speaks in feelings, insights, shifts, realizations, and these can only be heard when the mind is quiet. Silence also changes your relationship with pain. Earlier, pain immediately triggered thinking. Why me? What did I do wrong? How do I fix this? Silence removes this commentary. Pain is felt directly without interpretation. And strangely, pain without interpretation loses its poison. It becomes intensity, not suffering. Suffering is pain plus thinking. Silence removes thinking. What remains is pure experience. You may cry in silence. You may feel grief. You may feel loneliness. Let it happen. Silence is not here to make you feel good. Silence is here to make you real, and reality is healing. Slowly, a deep trust begins to grow. Trust in your own being, trust in life, trust in the moment. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop needing someone to tell you what to do. You stop running after advice. You start listening inwardly. This inner listening is the beginning of wisdom. You will also notice that when you carry silence into daily life, your reactions change. You pause before speaking. You listen more deeply. You do not rush to respond. You do not argue unnecessarily. You choose your words carefully. Or sometimes you choose silence instead. Silence gives dignity to speech. Words that come out of silence carry weight. Words that come out of noise carry confusion. When you speak after silence, people feel it. Even if they do not understand, they feel something grounded, something calm, something present. And then you realize something very important. Most of your past mistakes did not come from silence. They came from noise, from hurry, from emotional reactions, from unconsciousness. Silence would have saved you many wounds. This is why silence is not passive. Silence is powerful. A silent person is not weak. A silent person is centered. They do not need to prove, they do not need to dominate, they do not need to convince, their presence itself speaks. As silence deepens, fear begins to dissolve. Because fear needs imagination, fear needs future, fear needs thinking. Silence keeps you here, and here, in this moment, fear has no ground. You cannot be afraid in the present moment. Fear is always about tomorrow. Silence anchors you now. And when you live anchored in the now, life becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. Clear, direct, honest. You know when to move. You know when to wait. You know when to speak. You know when to remain quiet. Decisions arise naturally. This naturalness is lost in noise. Silence also teaches you one more thing, that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your roles, you are not your past. You are the space in which all these appear. This realization is freedom. Because once you know you are the space, you stop being controlled by the content. Thoughts may come, but they do not own you. Emotions may arise, but they do not drown you. Situations may change, but you remain. This remaining is peace, not excitement, not pleasure. Peace. And peace is the highest luxury in a restless world. The moment you stay a little longer in silence, something unexpected begins to happen. The mind, which was restless and noisy, slowly starts losing its urgency. It still brings thoughts, but the thoughts no longer feel like commands. They feel like passing clouds. Earlier, every thought demanded attention, reaction, belief. Now thoughts arise, stay for a moment, and dissolve on their own. You do not have to fight them. You do not have to stop them. You simply watch. This watching is the real meditation. Most people misunderstand meditation. They think meditation means forcing the mind to become quiet. That effort itself is noise. Silence is not created by force. Silence is revealed when effort drops. When you stop trying to control the mind naturally slows down. Just as muddy water becomes clear when you stop stirring it, the mind becomes clear when you stop interfering. In silence, you begin to see how impatient the mind is. It always wants results. It wants peace immediately. It wants answers quickly. It wants transformation fast. Silence teaches patience. Silence teaches you to sit without demand. And this is very difficult for the ego, because the ego survives on demand. Silence humbles you. You realize that you do not need to fix everything. You do not need to solve life like a problem. Life is not a puzzle to be solved. Life is a mystery to be lived. And mysteries are not solved by thinking. They are lived through awareness. When you sit silently, you may notice waves of boredom. Let them come. Boredom is simply the mind complaining that it is not being entertained. The mind is addicted to stimulation. Silence breaks that addiction. At first, the withdrawal is uncomfortable. But if you stay, boredom turns into stillness, and stillness turns into depth. In that depth, you start touching parts of yourself that were never accessible through words. A softness appears, a gentleness. You feel more vulnerable, yet stronger. More open, yet more stable. Silence makes you sensitive, but not weak. Sensitive in the sense that you can feel more, see more, hear more, not only outside, but inside. You start feeling your breath more clearly. The simple act of breathing becomes fascinating. The air coming in, the air going out, the pause in between, life happening without your effort. This simple observation reconnects you with existence. You realize that life is already taking care of itself. Your heart is beating without your permission. Your lungs are breathing without your control. Something vast is already working. This realization relaxes you deeply. You begin to trust, not blindly, but existentially. You feel that you are part of something bigger, something intelligent, something alive. And this feeling does not come from belief. It comes from direct experience. Silence gives you experience, not concepts. As this trust grows, anxiety starts dissolving. Anxiety is always about control. Anxiety wants certainty. Anxiety wants guarantees. Silence teaches you to live without guarantees. And strangely, living without guarantees feels lighter. You stop carrying the future like a burden. You stop dragging tomorrow into today. You live now. Living now does not mean irresponsibility. It means responsiveness. You respond to what is happening, not to what might happen. This makes your actions more precise, more appropriate, more compassionate. You also begin to see how much of your talking was unnecessary. Words used to fill space, not express truth. Silence makes you economical with words. You speak only when something real needs to be said. And because of this, when you speak, people listen, not because you demand attention, but because silence has given weight to your voice. Silence also heals relationships. When you are silent inside, you do not project as much. You do not expect others to fill your emptiness. You do not cling. You do not manipulate. You allow people to be as they are. And in that allowance, relationships become cleaner. Even conflicts lose their sharpness. Sometimes silence will show you painful truths. It may show you that certain relationships are false, that certain paths are wrong, that certain attachments are rooted in fear. Do not be afraid of these insights. Silence does not destroy your life. Silence removes what is unreal so that the real can grow. This is why silence is frightening for the false self and nourishing for the true self. As days go by, you may notice that you start craving silence, not as an escape, but as nourishment. Just as the body needs food, the soul needs silence. You may start enjoying moments alone, not because you hate people, but because you love clarity. You may also notice that even in noise, something inside you remains quiet. The outer world may be loud, but the inner world stays calm. This is the real fruit of silence, carrying it with you everywhere. You walk, but you are silent. You speak, but you are silent. You work, but you are silent. This silence is not visible, but it is powerful. It protects you from being pulled into unnecessary drama. It keeps you centered. It keeps you real. And slowly you understand why the sages always returned to silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because silence had shown them everything worth knowing. Silence does not give you answers in sentences. Silence changes you in such a way that questions drop, and when questions drop, answers are no longer needed. This is the greatest gift silence gives: freedom from confusion. The longer you remain in silence, the more you begin to realize that silence is not something you do, it is something you allow. Earlier, you were always doing something, even when you thought you were resting. The mind was doing, planning, replaying, imagining. Silence is the first time you truly stop doing, and when doing stops, being begins. Being is very unfamiliar at first. You don't know how to be, you only know how to act. So when being starts happening, you may feel lost, directionless, as if you are standing in an open field without signboards. The mind panics in this openness. It wants structure, it wants rules, it wants methods. But silence does not follow methods. Silence dissolves them. In silence, you start seeing how much of your life was driven by habit, habitual thinking, habitual reacting, habitual emotions, habitual identities. You were not choosing, you were repeating. Silence breaks repetition. It creates a gap. And in that gap, choice becomes possible. This is one of the greatest transformations silence brings. For the first time, you are no longer mechanical. Earlier, anger arose automatically. Fear arose automatically. Jealousy arose automatically. Guilt arose automatically. Now, you see them arising. And seeing changes everything. When you see anger coming, it loses half its power. When you see fear forming, it does not possess you fully. When you see jealousy appearing, it no longer controls your actions. Awareness is not suppression. Awareness is illumination. Darkness disappears not because you fight it, but because you bring light. Silence is that light. You also begin to understand that most of your suffering came from identification. You believed, I am angry, I am sad, I am broken, I am anxious. Silence slowly shows you the truth. Anger is there, sadness is there, anxiety is there, but you are not them. You are the space in which they appear. This realization is subtle but revolutionary. When you are no longer identified, emotions pass through you like weather. A storm may come, but the sky remains untouched. Earlier, you thought you were the storm. Now you know you are the sky. Because of this, you stop taking yourself so seriously. And this is not disrespect, this is freedom. Seriousness was ego trying to protect an image. Silence melts that image. And when the image melts, laughter becomes possible again. Not forced laughter, but a quiet smile that comes from understanding. You begin to smile at your own mind, at its fears, at its dramas, at its endless stories. This smile is compassion. Silence also brings you closer to your body. Earlier, you lived mostly in the head. Now sensations become clearer. You feel tension when it arises. You feel relaxation when it spreads. You feel when something is wrong for you. Even before thoughts form, the body becomes an ally, not something to ignore. This is very important because the body never lies. Thoughts can deceive. Emotions can exaggerate. The body simply signals. Silence allows you to hear those signals. Slowly, your decisions start coming from a deeper place, not from fear, not from excitement, not from pressure, but from alignment. You may not even be able to explain why you choose something. You just know. This knowing is quiet. It does not shout. It does not argue. But it is firm. This is intuition awakening. Intuition does not speak in language. It speaks in clarity. And clarity only arises in silence. You may also notice that your need to talk about yourself reduces. Earlier, you needed to express, explain, justify. Now you feel complete without telling your story again and again. Silence has listened to you so deeply that you no longer need external listeners all the time. This does not make you distant. It makes you whole. And when you are whole, sharing becomes joyful, not needy. Silence also changes how you relate to time. The constant feeling of not enough time begins to fade. You are no longer rushing internally. Even if the clock moves fast, you do not. You move with awareness. This makes everything feel more spacious. A few minutes of silence can feel richer than hours of distraction. The deeper you sink into silence, the more clearly you begin to see that silence was never something missing from your life. It was something covered by noise, covered by fear, covered by constant movement. Silence was always there, patiently waiting underneath everything. And now, as layers fall away, you feel as if you are remembering something very ancient, something very familiar. This remembrance feels intimate. It feels like coming home after a very long journey. In this state, you start noticing how unnecessary most of your inner struggles were. You were fighting thoughts instead of understanding them. You were running from emotions instead of feeling them. You are trying to control life instead of listening to it. Silence does not fight anything. Silence allows everything. And in that allowance, struggle dissolves. You see clearly now that resistance was the real problem, not pain, not fear, not uncertainty. Resistance. Silence removes resistance because silence has no agenda. It does not want life to be different. It does not demand comfort. It does not ask for guarantees. It simply witnesses whatever is. This witnessing has immense power. When you stop resisting sadness, sadness changes its quality. It becomes softness. When you stop resisting fear, fear becomes alertness. When you stop resisting uncertainty, uncertainty becomes openness. Silence transforms emotions not by force, but by understanding. Understanding is quiet. You also begin to notice how identity loosens its grip. Earlier, you were constantly defining yourself through roles, achievements, opinions, relationships. I am this. I am that. Silence does not support definitions. In silence, you are not this or that. You simply are. This can feel frightening at first because the ego survives on definition. Without definition, it feels lost. But what feels like loss to the ego is liberation to the soul. You realize you do not need a fixed identity to live. Life flows better without labels. You respond more freely. You are not trapped in consistency for the sake of image. You can change. You can evolve. You can contradict yesterday's version of yourself without guilt. Silence gives you permission to be fluid. This fluidity makes you more alive. You laugh more easily. You cry more honestly. You feel more deeply. You connect more authentically. There is no armor anymore. And without armor, intimacy becomes possible not only with people, but with life itself. You start feeling connected to simple things. The sound of wind, the movement of trees, the play of light, the rhythm of your breath. Things that were always there but unnoticed suddenly feel meaningful. Not because they have meaning, but because you are present. Presence brings richness to everything. You may notice that you no longer chase experiences. You no longer need constant stimulation. Silence has satisfied a hunger you did not even know you had. The hunger to rest in yourself. The hunger to stop becoming and simply be. And in this being, joy arises. Not excitement, not pleasure, but a quiet joy that does not depend on circumstances. This joy can exist even in difficulty, even in uncertainty, even in pain, because it is rooted in acceptance. Acceptance is not resignation. Acceptance is alignment. When you accept what is, you move with life instead of against it. And moving with life feels effortless. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start sensing, what is this asking of me? This subtle shift changes everything. Silence teaches you to listen to life's questions rather than demand answers. And life always speaks not in words, but in situations, sensations, intuitions. The more silent you are, the clearer the message. You may also notice that your need to judge reduces. You judge yourself less. You judge others less. Judgment was a way of creating distance. Silence brings closeness. You see people as they are, not as right or wrong, but as unconscious or aware, fearful or open, wounded or healing. This seeing softens the heart. Compassion grows naturally, not as a moral duty, but as understanding. You understand that everyone is acting from their level of awareness, and this understanding frees you from anger and bitterness. Silence also shows you that happiness is not something to achieve. It is something to allow. It appears when the mind stops interfering, just like the sky becomes visible when clouds move away. Happiness becomes visible when noise settles. And the most surprising realization arrives quietly. You were never incomplete. The feeling of incompleteness was created by noise. Silence reveals wholeness. You stop searching for yourself. You stop improving yourself obsessively. You stop fixing yourself endlessly. You relax into who you already are. This relaxation is not laziness. It is trust. Trust that life knows what it is doing. Trust that you do not have to push the river. Trust that growth happens naturally when there is space. Silence creates that space. And once space is there, growth is inevitable. But this growth is not aggressive, it is organic. Like a flower opening when the season is right. You begin to see your life as a process, not a problem. And this vision removes a huge burden. You stop being harsh with yourself. You stop demanding perfection. You allow mistakes. You allow learning. You allow pauses. Pauses become sacred because in pauses, silence deepens. And in silence, truth reveals itself without effort. At this stage, silence is no longer something you practice. It is something you trust. Even when thoughts come, silence is there behind them. Even when emotions arise, silence holds them. Even when life becomes intense, silence remains steady. This steadiness is your real strength. You are no longer shaken easily. You are no longer pulled into unnecessary chaos. You are no longer lost in others' expectations. You are anchored. Anchored not to beliefs, not to ideologies, not to identities, but to awareness itself. And awareness is the only true home. This is why those who discover silence never feel homeless again. Wherever they are at home. Even in uncertainty, there is grounding. Even in change, there is continuity. Silence gives you that continuity. And now you understand why silence is full of answers, not because it answers questions, but because it dissolves the questioner. When the one who asks disappears, answers are no longer needed. This is the final peace. As silence becomes more stable within you, you stop feeling like a seeker. Earlier, there was always a sense of lack, as if something was missing, as if you had to reach somewhere else, become someone else, achieve a certain state. Silence slowly dissolves this restlessness. You realize that the search itself was noise. And when noise drops, the seeker disappears. This is a very subtle shift. You are no longer trying to improve yourself. You are no longer chasing enlightenment. You are no longer comparing your inner state with some ideal. You simply live, and in this simplicity, something profound happens. Life starts revealing itself moment by moment, without effort. You begin to trust the present completely. Earlier, the present felt insufficient. You were always waiting for the next moment to be better. Now, the present feels enough. Even when it is uncomfortable, it feels honest. You stop escaping from what is. You stop postponing life. Silence makes you intimate with reality. In this intimacy, fear loses its foundation. Fear always lives in imagination. Silence anchors you in direct experience. And in direct experience, fear has nowhere to hide. You may still feel alertness, caution, sensitivity, but fear as psychological suffering dissolves. You stop worrying about becoming something special. You stop worrying about leaving a mark. You stop worrying about being remembered. These worries were born out of insecurity. Silence brings contentment. Contentment does not mean stagnation. It means you move from fullness, not from lack. When action comes from fullness, it has grace. When action comes from lack, it has desperation. Now your actions are no longer desperate. You also notice a deepening humility, not humility that bows to others, but humility that bows to existence. You see how small your personal dramas are in the vast movement of life, and instead of feeling insignificant, you feel relieved. The burden of being someone drops. You are grateful to be just a part of the whole. This gratitude has no object. It is not gratitude for success or comfort. It is gratitude for existence itself, for breathing, for seeing, for feeling, for being conscious. Silence reveals the miracle of ordinary life. A cup of tea becomes sacred. A walk becomes meditation. A moment of stillness becomes prayer. You no longer need special places or special times. Silence travels with you. Even when you speak, silence is behind your words. Even when you think, silence is underneath your thoughts. Even when you act, silence supports your movement. You begin to live from the center instead of the surface. Living from the center changes your entire quality. You no longer overreact. You no longer exaggerate. You no longer dramatize. Life becomes simple, direct, authentic. You also realize that silence has made you courageous in a very quiet way. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to face. You can face yourself without running. You can face uncertainty without collapsing. You can face loss without losing yourself. This courage is not loud. It does not announce itself, but it is unshakable. You become comfortable with not knowing. Earlier, not knowing was frightening. Now, not knowing feels spacious. You allow life to unfold instead of forcing conclusions. You understand that clarity comes when it is needed, not when demanded. Silence teaches timing. This sense of timing brings wisdom. You know when to act and when to wait. You know when to speak and when silence is more truthful. You know when to hold on and when to let go. Letting go becomes natural. You let go of people who do not resonate. You let go of habits that drain you. You let go of identities that no longer fit. And you do this without bitterness, without drama, without regret. Silence makes letting go gentle. At this stage, you begin to see that silence is not opposed to life. Silence is life in its purest form. Noise was a layer added by conditioning. Silence is what remains when conditioning loosens. This is why silence feels so real. You stop asking spiritual questions. not because you have answers, but because the questions lose urgency. The hunger behind the questions is gone. You are no longer trying to escape suffering or reach bliss. You are simply present with what is. This presence is enough. You may still enjoy happiness. You may still feel sadness. You may still experience pleasure and pain, but none of these define you anymore. They pass through awareness like waves through water. You remain. And remaining is liberation. Silence has done its work, not by changing your life outwardly, but by changing the way you meet life. The same world, the same challenges, the same relationships, but a completely different quality of being. You are no longer tangled in the mind. You are no longer lost in stories. You are no longer divided inside. You are whole. This wholeness does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It simply radiates. And those who are sensitive will feel it. Those who are not will pass by. Both are fine. You are no longer here to convince anyone. Silence has freed you from that burden. And now you understand the deepest truth. Silence is not something you practice to escape the world. Silence is something you discover so that you can live in the world without losing yourself. This is the final gift of silence. You are in the world, but the world is no longer inside you, and that is real freedom. The silence that has grown within you now no longer feels like something separate from life. It is not an experience you enter and exit. It has become the background of everything. Whether you are alone or with others, whether you are active or resting, something within remains untouched, still aware. This is not withdrawal from life. This is presence in its purest form. Earlier, you used to disappear into situations, into people, into emotions, into thoughts. Life happened to you, and you were constantly reacting. Now, life happens through you. There is a witnessing that never collapses. Even when emotions arise, even when intensity comes, even when pain visits, something within watches calmly, lovingly, without judgment. This witnessing is not cold. It is deeply alive. It allows everything to be exactly as it is. And because of this allowance, life flows more smoothly. You stop resisting moments just because they are uncomfortable. You stop clinging to moments just because they are pleasant. You understand that everything moves, everything changes, and you remain the space in which change happens. This understanding brings immense relaxation. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, the mind softens. You are no longer holding yourself tightly. You are no longer controlling every inner movement. Control was fear. Silence replaces control with trust. Trust does not mean you know what will happen next. Trust means you are okay even if you don't. This is a very high state of maturity. In this maturity, ambition changes its quality. You may still work, still create, still build, still contribute, but there is no desperation. You are not trying to fill a hole inside. You are expressing what is already overflowing. Work becomes expression, not compensation. Relationships also change deeply. You no longer look at others as sources of happiness or pain. You meet them as fellow beings. You enjoy closeness, but you are not afraid of distance. You love deeply, but you do not cling. You share honestly, but you do not dissolve yourself. This balance is possible only through silence. Without silence, love becomes need. With silence, love becomes sharing. You also notice that silence has made you very truthful. Not brutally truthful, not aggressively honest, but simply aligned. You no longer say things you do not mean. You no longer promise what you cannot give. You no longer live in contradiction. Your outer life starts matching your inner state. This alignment brings integrity, and integrity brings peace. Peace is not excitement. Peace is not pleasure. Peace is not achievement. Peace is the absence of inner conflict. And inner conflict ends only when you stop fighting yourself. Silence ends that fight. You may notice now that even when problems arise, they feel manageable. Not because they are smaller, but because you are bigger. Your capacity has expanded. You are not overwhelmed so easily. You respond instead of panic. You wait instead of rush. You feel instead of escape. This capacity is not learned. It is remembered. You were always capable. You were just distracted. Silence removes distraction. And then something very subtle yet very profound happens. You stop needing constant meaning. Earlier, you were always trying to make sense of everything. Why did this happen? What does this mean? What should I learn from this? Silence relaxes this obsession with meaning. Life does not always need to make sense. Life needs to be lived, and living does not require explanation. You become comfortable with mystery. You allow unanswered questions to exist. You allow uncertainty to breathe. You allow life to surprise you. This openness keeps you young inside, curious, flexible, alive. The rigidity that came from fear melts away. You also realize that silence has made you very grounded. You are no longer floating in thoughts about the past or the future. You are here, in the body, in the moment, in contact with reality. This grounding makes even difficult moments bearable. Suffering reduces not because life becomes easy, but because resistance disappears. You no longer say, "This should not be happening." You say, "This is happening. Let me meet it." This meeting is courageous. And courage born out of silence is very different from courage born out of ego. Egoic courage is loud and reactive. Silent courage is steady and patient. It does not rush. It does not prove. It does not impress. It simply stands, and because it stands, it endures.